Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Naomi Ostwald-Kawamura. I'm the Executive Director of Densho. As most folks joining us likely know, Densho is a public history organization in digital archives that focuses on preserving, sharing, and educating the public on the wartime incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II. So as part of this work to enhance public understanding about this history, we're excited to share our latest digital platform, which we feel breaks new ground in the presentation and visualization of Manzanar, which was the first WRA concentration camp to incarcerate Japanese Americans. So this project was made possible with funding from the California Civil Liberties Public Education Program, as well as the Kip Takuda Memorial Civil Liberties Public Education Program. So the two individuals that have helped us to realize this project will take us through the rest of this hour. I am with Brian Niiya. Brian is Densho's resident historian. He's our content director and the editor of the Densho Encyclopedia. We're also joined by Geoff Froh. He is Densho's deputy director and our chief technologist, who also holds deep content knowledge about Japanese American history. So both Geoff and Brian will guide us through the project, its features, and our future plans. So we are incredibly excited to be sharing this with you all. And thanks again for joining us today. So I'll now mute myself and take it away, Geoff and Brian.
Great. Thank you so much, Naomi. And thanks everyone for joining us. I'm seeing in the chat, people are joining from all over the country. So that's great. Thanks for taking the time to join us. So today's presentation will we'll start by just giving a brief background on the project and how it came about and why Manzanar. A little bit about the data also behind the project. Then Geoff will take you through a demonstration of the site very briefly, and then we'll talk about some next steps and be sure to leave a lot of time for a Q&A at the end, and then get you back to work or wherever you need to go in the hour. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about the background of the project. So it stems really from our Sites of Shame project, which I trust that most of you would be familiar with who are on this program. That debuted a couple of years ago. And Sites of Shame, if we can go to the next slide, there's a kind of a screenshot of this. Kind of takes a broad look at the incarceration story. It's a map-based interface that looks at like all or almost all of the sites at which Japanese Americans were confined during World War II. And takes a look at the journeys of people going to and from the sites. We map the exclusion orders, so you can look at where people from specific parts of the West Coast, when they were incarcerated, and to where initially. But what we didn't really have a chance to do was to do a similar kind of mapping project on the specific sites themselves. And we thought it was important to do that, particularly for the big War Relocation Authority sites. And so that was kind of the impetus for the project. And with the support of the California Civil Liberties Public Education Program, because it's a California-based funding source, we decided to focus on one of the two California WRA camps. And we decided essentially on Manzanar rather than Tule Lake, just because the data and the journeys to Manzanar was a little easier to deal with. Tule Lake, as you know, had a pretty complicated history. So I think that will be later. If we go to the next slide, so when you click on any of the sites, you'll get kind of a link to the Densho Encyclopedia article on that site. And I think what we wanted to do is to then, as I said, do something that provides a little more, uses some kind of a similar platform, similar style. We use the same data visualization firm, Stamen Design, to help us visualize the data for Manzanar. And the idea was that we would use existing maps and be able to note sites of particular note within the camp. And I think what we think would be really exciting to people in particular is to actually be able to map where Manzanar inmates actually lived within the camp, to actually hover over barracks and blocks and be able to get a sense of who lived there. So I think that was the exciting thing that we really wanted to focus on. So briefly, just to give you some information on the background data that we use to create the site. So if you go to the next slide, we primarily relied on data generated by the WRA statistical sections. As you probably know, the WRA kept voluminous statistics, starting with the Form 26 form that was a census form filled out when Japanese Americans first entered the camps in Manzanar. This was done in the summer of 1942. And then over time, many additional censuses that were done by the WRA at Manzanar. So this is a shot of the name-by-name accounting that was done at the end of December 44, a February 1943 census. Next was a March 1944 census. We looked at train logs. Manzanar in particular had a very large contingent that was segregated. You know, these were the no-nos, so-called, who were sent to Tule Lake in October of 43 and February of 44. And the train logs also give data on the barrack addresses of those segregees. And then finally, the final accountability roster, which was kind of done at the end of the incarceration after the camps closed, kind of a summary of everyone who had been at the camp. These were actually published in a microfilm publication by the National Archives. And over the past few years, as part of our names project, we've actually kind of datafied this. We've actually had people entering the data manually to be able to manipulate the data and to be able to extract it in different ways. But it doesn't include barrack information for everyone. And thus that's the need for drawing in all of these other sources that were shown previously. Most of those come from WRA materials that were digitized by the Bancroft Library over the past few years. They've received a series of Japanese American confinement sites grants to digitize that material. And the Kip Tokuda grant that Naomi referred to, this is the state of Washington's kind of equivalent of the Civil Liberties public education program. We use that funding to actually hire a data firm to extract the data from these kind of paper or digitized records to kind of datafy that as well, to be able to extract that. So anyway, there's a lot more to that, but that's just briefly the data sources we used. And then the maps we used are WRA maps that actually were shared with us by the Manzanar National Historic Site folks. So thanks to them as well. And then finally, if you go to the next slide, as most of you on this call will know, Manzanar, one of the unique things about Manzanar is that it was first in a reception center, so-called, run by the WCCA, the body that ran all the so-called assembly centers, before the WRA took over. So the WRA data for Manzanar just starts suddenly on June 1 and doesn't include anything that happened in the 10 weeks prior. So we're also starting to incorporate data from the pre-WRA period. These are documents, for instance, from the National Archives in San Bruno up in the Bay Area. And this is a form this is the form that was filled out at the Civil Control Station before Japanese Americans were incarcerated, in the days right before. This is where family numbers were assigned and the infamous white tags were issued. And then if you go to the next slide, these are the forms that were filled out upon immediate arrival at Manzanar. And you see in the upper right, gives an initial barrack address that was assigned when Japanese Americans, the inmates, first arrived at Manzanar. And we just happened to choose the Hori family to highlight with these documents. This is the family of redress activist William Hori, who's Willie, a teenager with his family at the time when they entered Manzanar. So at any rate, that's just a brief summary of the data we use for the barrack addresses and some of the maps that are involved. And with that, I'm going to now turn it over to Geoff and have him take you through the site.
Thanks, Brian. So we're at the site demo time. So if you'll bear with me for just a second here, I'm going to stop sharing and share the site itself. All right, so hopefully everyone's seeing that now. This is the Manzanar CloseUp site. And for those of you, again, who've used Sites of Shame, you'll probably see some similarities to that interface. So hopefully it'll be pretty easy for you to navigate around. Again, we're focused on just the Manzanar experience itself. So that's kind of the area of the map that you're able to see, and you can zoom in and zoom out and see barracks and buildings, the main residential area of the camp. We also were able to, as Brian said, get a really great historical map from the Manzanar National Historical Site that was, I believe this is from, let's see, yeah, this is one of the original, or one of the construction plans part of the way into the camp period. So you can overlay that view if you'd like. You can also overlay a satellite view, which is kind of interesting because you get to see the work that's being done now. I mean, here is the historical site headquarters, and you can see actually the excavation of a few of the barrack areas, reconstruction of some of the barrack areas themselves, which is pretty interesting. But it also gives you a sense of the sort of desolate nature of this environment. And you can see that even today, it's still fairly desolate. And we can turn these map layers on and off right here. So the next thing I'd like to show you is we've highlighted a few particular locations in the camp. So for example, the WWII Lath House here, and if we click on it, there's a short explanation of the site itself, a little bit about when it was operational, and then a link to the Densho Encyclopedia article or some other external reference if that's available. And then we have photos that are from the digital repository for the site itself. And you can actually go directly to the photo within the Densho digital repository or the DVR and see that there as well. Let's see. Brian, were there other locations you wanted to look at that were interesting?
Yeah, Manzanar, because it was the very first of the WRA camps, and it was also the first, it was built before any of the other so-called assembly centers as well. It has a lot of unique things to it. The WWII project is one. It was one of the very few camps that had a camouflage net factory, which I think is also highlighted. It was the site of the infamous children's village, the orphanage that, in some ways better than almost anything else illustrates the kind of ridiculousness of the mass incarceration that you had to imprison, literally take children out of orphanages. So yeah, Manzanar has a lot of those unique sites, as well as things you find at other WRA camps, such as the libraries, the churches, those sorts of things, which are also highlighted here.
Yeah, and one of the nice things about the way that our contractor Stamen designed the infrastructure, we can add these sites. We can add more photographs over time if we find them. We can add additional information about those individual sites, and we can actually add more information about other sites to the map. So we're definitely planning on doing that as well, because there are some very interesting things on the map, or there are some very interesting things that we found in looking for maps from the era, including the cooperative, which operated a lot of the stores and retail in camp itself. had a map that showed where like the fish market was and where the various, like there was I think a a repair store or watch repair place and things like that. So all these things are things we're going to be able to put on the map. So another part of the interface you may notice is this population over time kind of timeline histogram. So we can see from the beginning of the camp period in 1942 until its closure in late October, actually, I guess, November of 1945, you can actually see sort of the population of the camp overall changing. And we can select a particular period in time, for example. And now you can see we're looking at February 1944. And we see this very precipitous drop in population right around this time. And not sure this could be a quiz to see who can identify why that might be the case. But we'll just tell you that that's when a lot of the segregants were sent to Tule Lake. So that's that big drop off in population. One of the things that we can also see is this calendar up here that appears, and we can actually page through the calendar like it's a calendar, or we can access that through the timeline. You can click on a time period and select it. On the timeline, you also see these green boxes, and these represent key events in camp history. So if we look at this one on the 20th, you can see that this is the date when the first of the second group of segregees, and Brian can probably explain why that's important, but oh, Brian?
Oh no, go ahead. Yeah, it's a little into the weeds. So yeah, unless someone asks about it, yeah.
At any rate, we can see as well these blue boxes on the calendar, which are newspapers that were published in camp. This is the Manzanar Free Press, and we have digital editions of these newspapers in the Densho digital repository already. And so we actually linked to the dates on which they were published in this calendar. So if we look at the 26th, for example, we can see an image of the newspaper, and we can in fact go directly to that newspaper edition in the Densho digital repository and look at the actual front page, or look at actually the entire newspaper from that era. And we can see that on that date, there was a giant snowstorm, which caused inconveniences, including, if you can, it's a little bit hard to read here, but there was actually a delay in the trains that were supposed to be taking people to Tule Lake because of this giant snowstorm. So it's just kind of an interesting way of getting a sense of the flow of time through camp and what was happening. So another piece of the map that's important to note is this box over here, which is the ability to filter the camp population by various facets. And so we can, for example, look at pre-exclusion states. We can see, and what happens here, actually, that's not a very good one, because most people, you can see, we're from California, so they're all going to be orange. Let's filter by the birth decade. That's actually pretty interesting. So the little dots, each of these dots on the map represents a person, and that represents the person's where they actually lived in the camp. You can see that we've kind of clustered them together as well, because each of these barrack buildings was broken up into, depending on the time, either, I believe, 4 or 6, Brian, is that right?
Yeah, initially 4, and then they were later subdivided into smaller quarters later on.
So you can see here all the people who lived in this particular barrack. So we can look by birth decade, which is sort of interesting because there's this gigantic population of people who were born in the 1920s and 1930s. We can also look at things like the departure type. So the blue dots, we get back up here, represents the people who were sent to Tule Lake, the segregants. And you can actually see, family clusters sometimes. You can visualize, in fact, here's one where one person in the family went, or one person in this family cluster went. And you can also see some patterns in, different barracks, different blocks, maybe having, fewer or more people, depending on how they answered the so-called loyalty questionnaire. So it's another way of sort of visualizing these patterns that we knew existed, but we're only able to see now when we can see it geographically on the map. So one of the very key features here, of course, which I'm sure everyone wants to see, is the ability to search for a particular person on the map. Let me zoom out just a hair here. And we're going to look for the Hori family. And we found them here. And we're going to zoom in on, they were in 10 or block 10, barrack 4. And there's Willie. And then the rest of his family, who are highlighted because they share the same WRA family number. And we can see all the details that we've collected from, or some demographic details about William himself, including when he entered camp, when he departed camp, where he went. These entry types and departure types are drawn from this kind of standardized vocabulary that the WRA maintained. And we can also look at other members of the family as well and see all of their details. So just as a note, we are not completely done geolocating everyone on the map. And that's partially, so there will be some people who you can search for where you won't see a camp address, but you will find their details. And that's because we may not have the barrack information or the address information just based on when they arrived at camp, because there were gaps in the census instruments. So if they arrived too late or left earlier in certain periods of time, there may not actually be existing records about those barracks or about those addresses. In addition, we're still attempting to connect together the names. There were a lot of transcription errors in the original WRA data sets. And in fact, not just transcribing them into Excel or something like that, which we did later, but there were just a lot of handwriting errors and a lot of people's names that were spelled incorrectly, sometimes with the wrong family numbers. So we're still reconciling all that as well. And that will continue to be a process that we'll be engaged in for a while, I think. Let's see, I think that was all I had. And you kind of get a sense of what you can do on the map, both through time and through searching for people and filtering by individual facets. But I encourage you just to go in and try things out. It's really a very exploratory. It's not a single sort of storyline interface that we've built. It's more about kind of exploring the map, exploring the data, and seeing all of these people in the place where they actually were forced to live. So with that, I think I'm going to end the demo here. We'll jump back to the slides. Hold on just a moment.
Okay, yeah, and then in terms of where we go from here, as Geoff mentioned, there's still a lot of refinement we need to do with the data, a lot of other information that we need to keep adding. So that's going to go on for a while. And then, we are very much viewing this as the first of a series. We'd like to do this for the other confinement sites. So we'd love to be able to do this for all of the WRA sites, and then be interesting to do this if the data exists for, the so-called assembly centers and other, at least the major Army and Justice Department sites as well. This is going to be a process that will go on for a little bit of time. We don't have any concrete plans yet. I think a lot of it's going to depend on funding and interest and so forth. So yeah, stay tuned. We're definitely going to, yeah, it's definitely something we're going to be working on in these next few years. So, and then with that, guess we will go to, yeah, just take some questions and answers. Let's see, starting with one from an S. Nakamura, who wants to know about Bainbridge Island. And they were the very first group to be interned, correct? And the date of entry should have been March 31. My father's family is in this group. And yes, Bainbridge is fascinating. And I wonder, is it possible to go back to the site? Because I think that might be interesting to show, because almost everyone from Manzanar was from California, and 90% was from the Los Angeles area. But then there was this group from Bainbridge Island, and because it's color coded, you can actually pick them out very quickly. Looking at the map, it's the blue dots are the Bainbridge Island folks, and you can see that they're actually concentrated in certain blocks. And as many of you will know, a lot of the Bainbridge folks were able to transfer to Minidoka, where the other Washingtonians primarily were, after a year or so at Manzanar. So yeah, they're a fascinating story, and it's another unique element of the Manzanar story. Another question was, is there similar data from and about the other confinement sites? And the answer is yes, although what we found is that the specifics of the data for every site are a little bit different. Each one has its own unique problems. Some of the final accountability rosters, for instance, do not include barrack addresses. Some only include some barrack addresses. There are other, Manzanar is very orderly in terms of the population flow, but pretty much everyone who came to Manzanar, almost everyone who was at Manzanar was there by like June or end of May of 42, other than like the transfers from the Justice Department camps, whereas other camps have a much more complicated story of people coming in from Tule Lake, transferred from Jerome, etc. So yeah, every camp, the storyline is a little different. So let's see. A question from Linda Brandeis. Is there this type of information posted in 1, 2, and 3? Do we have info about people who went off the camps and went to work in the fields in the Midwest to pick crops and do farm work? Kind of, sort of, I guess is the answer. The farm work data is not readily accessible. Well, let's see. Because the bulk of those who left to do farm work left and then came back. So that isn't necessarily tracked in the final accountability roster and the exit data, as opposed to people who leave to do farm work and stay out. That would be registered. I don't know that we would track the farm workers, although maybe we should. The ones who went out and came back, because it was a substantial number in the number of the camps. Like at Minidoka, I know, so many people left to do farm work that it actually created labor shortages within the camp. But yeah, that's a great question. So let's see. From Sandy Sawa, is the GIS database shown publicly available?
I'll take that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is not actually a database for anyone out there who is kind of a GIS geek. This is using sort of a client-side leaflet, I believe, based interface, and we're just looking directly at CSV files in the backside, and then there's just a shape file that it's using to feed the front end interface itself. If we have actually shared a lot of this data and a lot of this kind of data with a number of researchers who are working on specific projects, be it genealogy projects or sort of data science and history projects. And so if that's something that you're interested in, please, you can contact us and we can absolutely arrange to share data with you. I think we're also planning on having a more structured way of sharing the raw data sets themselves, so that there won't even be a need to contact us. You can just download those and do what you will with them. So. I'll take that SIRE question too.
Yeah, I was going to throw that to you. Yeah.
Not currently, but we did actually work with them in the distant past when they were working on some of their first 3D visualization projects. And for people who aren't familiar, this is and I should read the question. My apologies. Do you have any plans to integrate this information with 3D modeling efforts by SciArc on Open Heritage 3D? SciArc is a company that does 3D visualizations and has done kind of digital archaeology to reconstruct historical sites using very accurate, usually very accurate 3D model, or sorry, 3D imaged, so 3D scanned versions of the places that they're working on. And I'm trying to remember, Brian, maybe you remember, was it Minidoka or Heart Mountain? I cannot remember now which camp it was they worked on. Maybe it might have been Manzanar. But at any rate, we did help them in the, again, very distant past with some historical images. But this data is a little bit different because we're not actually doing 3D imaging to generate the views. We're doing it at a much kind of rougher level than that. I mean, we literally took the existing maps and drew the polygons ourselves onto the maps. So they're not, I would not consider them like engineering quality maps, but they're really for the educational visualization part of it. But absolutely, we would love to plug in some more very accurate data into their models. So.
And then while you have the map up, there's a question about, if you do not know the barrack address for your family, how would you look up that information? And then if we find errors in the information on the site, where do you report it? And relatedly, can users make suggested edits to the database?
Yes, please. But you can simply search for your relatives. I'm just going to search Yamada because I know there's probably a couple of those there. Let's see if I can find one. Yeah, so here's an example. So George Chuji Yamada does not have a camp address. And that's very likely. Let's see. It looks like he arrived in 42 and left in August of 45. So we would have to look and see why we don't have information for this particular individual. But this is what you would see if the person does not have a barrack address.
Yeah, it's weird. He should have one.
He should, and very likely what it is he didn't line up. His records didn't line up to all the other records. Yeah. So again, hopefully we'll take care of that. I'll note this one in particular, and we'll do that.
So, and then how should they just email the info or to us specifically if they have edits or?
I think emailing the info account would be the best way to do that. And we'll include, we should include some information. I don't believe that's currently in the About This Map tab, but we'll include a section in here on how to update this data or how to suggest data if you know someone that is not included on the map right now.
See, another question from Roger Ozaki. When the Japanese Americans died in camp, who did their funerals and where were they buried? That's an interesting question. I actually wrote a piece in the blog on funerals, but the short answer is for the most part, well, first of all, there are cemeteries at all of the WRA camps, but relatively few people are buried there. Most people who died in camp were cremated. WRA camps actually had a contract with local I'm forgetting the word, but crematories in nearby communities that would do the cremations of people who died in camp. Because most people, knowing that they were not going to be in this place forever, didn't want to bury grandpa, in the middle of nowhere in a desert somewhere where there was going to be no one to care for the grave. So in most cases, people who died were cremated. The remains were kept in urns and then taken back with the families when they went back to wherever they went to after the war. Though, as I mentioned, there are cemeteries in all the camps, so there are some people who are buried at the various sites, including at Manzanar. So let's see. Other questions. What is the next confinement site that is in line to have its data made into a close-up like this done at Manzanar? And or is there funding for another camp yet? What are the next steps for your project? And the short answer is no. Yeah, we haven't gotten there yet. And I think a lot of it's going to depend on funding and availability of data, and I'm sure possibly partnerships with other organizations who have a particular interest in one or another of the camps. So we kind of haven't got there yet.
Yeah, and
another question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add, and I think Brian alluded to this earlier. I mean, one of the things that we did when we did the original, when we worked with Stamen to do the original design for this project, I mean, the intent was to build something that was not so Manzanar specific that it would be scalable and we could actually use it for different camps. We have a data model that's pretty generalized. The platform is pretty generalized. So the intent was to be able to do, to kind of use it as a pilot to be able to look at other camps as well, given data and the time to do it.
Another question is, thank you for this work. What are the plans to add additional, especially recreational sites to Manzanar's map? Basketball courts, baseball fields, etc. Additionally, did Manzanar have a USO for soldiers visiting family? And yeah, I mean, it's definitely something we can add. I don't know offhand about the USO question. I imagine the answer is yes, because I think most camps did have that, but I don't know the specifics for Manzanar. But yeah, the good thing about this project is that it's fairly easy to add other sites as we go along. So undoubtedly we will do that. I mean, for instance, I think the Buddhist and Protestant main churches are noted on the map, as well as the main library. But there were also satellite facilities, right? There were other sites. There was a branch library. There were high school and elementary school libraries. So at some point, I think we will enter some of these other facilities as well. So it's very much a work in progress. So, but yeah, thanks for that. I think that's a good suggestion that I think people would be interested in. Let's see. Next, to what concentration camps were the folks in LA sent? How about those from the Imperial Valley? LA folks, because there was such a large population of Japanese Americans in LA, they were sent to many camps. Manzanar was one of the main ones. Manzanar had primarily people from West Los Angeles, San Fernando Valley, parts of areas south of downtown. But other parts of LA were sent to other camps. The Arkansas camps, Jerome and Rower had LA people, Amachi, Heart Mountain. I'm probably missing some, but there was just a lot. And the Imperial Valley folks, if I'm not mistaken, were sent primarily to Poston. To get the exact answer to that question, though, you can go to the original sites of shame, and you can actually go neighborhood by neighborhood, and it'll tell you exactly where people went. So let's see. What are your thoughts about including an image of each individual or an artifact connected to individuals in the database?
I'll answer that.
Yeah.
We do. So this project, and this actually relates to another question someone asked a little bit later on, which is, are we working or doing any data sharing with the IDA project, which is run by Duncan Williams down in USC. So the IDA project, if you haven't visited, idezo.com is the website. Actually, I'll put that up here real quick. And this is a piece of, let's see. This is one part of the IDA project, which is an attempt to gather all the names of all people who were in any of the facilities, the WRA facilities or the DOJ facilities or other kinds of incarceration during World War II. And the data here is also in the IDATO books, which have been on display if anyone has been down to JANM, to the Japanese American National Museum in LA. You can find names and actually stamp your family members' names in a physical book. And there's plans for some physical memorials as well. So we are working with Duncan and the IDAZO project, or the IDA project, and we've shared data back and forth. We're in fact connecting the names in the names registry, which is our kind of names database project, to the names that exist on this map. So almost all the individuals on this map have a unique identifier that also is in our names registry. And then things that we've had in the digital repository that relate to individuals can be tagged with those individual identifiers, those individual names as well. And that's going to be launching pretty soon, our new version of the Densho of the names database, the names registry. So we will have the ability to kind of connect together the names across all of the different information channels that we have to unique individuals. And we're hoping to collect, things like photographs of individuals and perhaps even, photos or other digital materials from the families themselves as well.
Let's see, actually, you just answered a question about data
Okay.
sharing with the IDA project. Someone also asked, was there any collaboration with the Manzanar Interpretive Center for this project? And yes, as mentioned, they provided some of the maps, this main map, actually, the scan of that. They're also very interested in the reception center data, because they don't have that. They get a lot of requests of visitors who want to know, when did my family arrive at Manzanar? Where were they initially placed within the camp? That information largely they don't have that, right? Because that's all pre-WRA, and the WRA information basically says that everyone arrived at Manzanar on June 1, because that was the date that the WRA took over Manzanar. Whereas the reception center data and the civil control station data will tell you the date that specific groups arrived at Manzanar. So yeah, we definitely will be sharing that with the historic site. And then another question, Manzanar is a cemetery outside the fence boundaries. Does your map extend to there? And I think Geoff can scroll down, and it does, yes. The cemetery is also the site of the famous photographed Ide Toll memorial. So yes. Let's see. Another question, does your site integrate key historical events such as the Manzanar riot and where it took place, etc.? If not, do you have plans and funding to do so? Thanks for the wonderful work of all who created this. Let's see. I mean, we definitely, there's definitely a timeline that includes those key events. I don't know if we integrate that to the map necessarily, because something like the Manzanar riot or uprising doesn't have a single site, right? It takes place in a number of different places. So, but yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, I think that is something we could definitely do. But it does show up in the timeline that's attached, that's a part of the site. Let's see, another question. My father started out in Manzanar, was sent to Tule Lake, and then I have a picture of him on the winning baseball team at Santa Fe, 1945. I cannot find much information about Santa Fe. Also, as a no-no boy, with the rest of his family had stayed in Manzanar. Very good question. Because Santa Fe, is run by the Justice Department outside the WRA, that information is just harder to come by. It exists, but it's not conveniently digitized and online to the same degree that the WRA data is. So I think a long-term project would be to try to gather that information. Most likely having to go to the National Archives to gather that. Although I think the WWII project has some of that information. But yeah, I think that's kind of a later step is to look at the non-WRA sites. And as far as the second part of the question, with the rest of his family had stayed at Manzanar, that just varies case by case. I think in most cases, the whole the family generally wants to stay together. So I think most of the time, families would join the segregees in going to Tule Lake, but that was not universal. There are certainly cases where the families were split apart at that point. So, but it's really a case by case thing. And if that information you should be able to get that information from the final accountability record. It'll tell you, what each family member did in terms of whether they went to Tule Lake or whether they stayed at Manzanar and left Manzanar for some other place subsequently. So that information should be in the final accountability record. You can find the scans of the final accountability record on our website. You can just go to the digital archive and search for the final accountability rosters, and it should come up. So there was a question earlier also about the number of people who died in camp and the number of people who joined the 442nd or the Army. I don't have the figures off the top of my head, but there's actually a WRA statistical volume that they issued as part of the series of final reports of the WRA. It's called The Evacuated People. And there's a digitized copy of that in our DDR that you can download. And it has exhaustive data on questions like that. So it'll give you the number of deaths total and the number of deaths at each camp. As I recall, the number is something like 17 or 1800, something like that. But yeah, the evacuated people would have the detailed information on the number of deaths. So let's see. Did I miss anything? Yeah, I think I got all of them. Oh, maybe not.
Let's see. Oh, kind of two related questions. Yeah. Oh, or about when the project started and what was the genesis of the project. So yeah, and I think Brian talked about that a little bit. I mean, it's been, this has been something that we've wanted to do, I think, since the Sites of Shame project originally launched almost it's pandemic time, so I'm not quite sure. Is it 2 years ago? I think it might have been 2 years ago. But we've been collecting again. I mean, a lot of what we've done is sort of develop this large body of data and resource, and thought about, well, what can we do with all of this data? What would be an interesting way to explore this and useful for people? So that's kind of been a driver for us for the last few years in projects like Sites of Shame and the Names Registry.
Let's see. Oh, someone asked a question about the 10 who were sent back to Japan. Any idea why? Intrigued about what happened to them. Did they return? Did they survive the war? And I couldn't tell you this. Couldn't tell you about that one. Yeah, I don't know the story there offhand. I mean, most of those, of course, who were sent to Japan did so via Tule Lake. But there were some who were, repatriates who might have gone on one of the voyages of the Gripsholm, the exchange ship, during the war. There's a Densho Encyclopedia article on the Gripsholm that, if you're interested. But other than the Gripsholm, I think everyone else probably would have gone via Tule Lake, if I'm not mistaken. So anyway, let's see. One more let's see. Just asking if we will continue to do workshops, and we'll be interested in sharing at a workshop. And I think generally the answer is yes. This is a more specific question, so I think we'll answer that offline. But yeah, I think we'd love to do further workshops and share information about this as well. Let's see. Thank you for locating people into barracks. I asked this question when I visited Manzanar several years ago, and the rangers did not have the data to answer it. So yeah, well, yeah, thank you. Glad that this is something that you find interesting and useful. So yeah, we definitely look forward to continuing to add to it. As we noted a number of times, it's very much a work in progress. So we will keep building on this. So anyway, we're getting down to the end. So yeah, maybe we should wrap up. And I think we have a last appeal from Naomi that you wanted to talk about. So maybe that was we had a slide, I think, for that.
Yes, so thank you, Brian and Geoff. Thank you. Huge gratitude to Brian, who just brings rich content knowledge to our projects. I always feel like I learned something when I attend anything where Brian is speaking. And gratitude to Densho's tech team, led by Geoff Froh. And this also includes another Geoff Yost and Philip Kikawa, who takes ideas and realizes them. So thank you to all of you for joining us today. I saw up to like 200 participants, which is so heartening. And to close, I want to also just share that part of what makes Densho so unique in the sea of historical and memorial activities is that we have an interest in exploring what technology enables. This philosophy has been part of Densho since its founding, and we consider the possibilities of kind of using modern day tools to reinterpret and reimagine our understanding of the past in new ways. So this Manzanar project is part of that ethos. So we hope that this hour was informative for all of you, and I'll kick myself for not saying it, but it's December, and I hope you'll consider making an end-of-year gift to Densho. Your support continues to help make Densho expand public understanding of the past. I also know that many of you have personal connections to the stories that we share, and so it ensures that Densho can continue to be responsible stewards of this important history. So I'm truly passionate about what we do at Densho. I love Densho's encyclopedia, the DDR, the oral oral history collections, and your support ensures that Densho can continue to support staff like Geoff and Brian, who are able to breathe life into projects like this. So Densho's donations can be made online at densho.org/give, and want to thank everyone for joining us and thank the staff and everyone at Densho. So thank you so much and happy holidays, everyone. Thank you.
And also wanted to shout out Nina Wallace and Natasha Barner, who are behind the scenes running this presentation as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
And please contact us if you have any further questions or suggestions, or find errors or corrections or whatever. So yeah, we look forward to hearing from you. And feel free, please go to the site and poke around and explore. That's the whole point.
Yeah, thank you so much.